the Crafty Gemini. I post weekly how-to video tutorials right here on my YouTube channel, and in this video I'm teaching you how to make a quilted wall hanging complete with a light kit. Quilted wall hangings are quick and easy to make. They're a great weekend project, and they also make great gifts. So my suggestion is you check out the variety of quilt panels that Northcott Fabrics puts out. I've included a link in the description box below for you to click on it and check out all the different themes they have, things like holiday, nursery, sports, and even nature type themed quilt panels for you to use, because you can really install this light kit on any type of quilt that you'd like. Now before we get started with our step-by-step tutorial, let's briefly go over the materials we'll need in order to complete a light up wall hanging just like this one. So to make the actual quilted wall hanging, what we need is a front, which is going to be a panel that we're using here. Here's a sample one. It's a red holiday themed one. And then you're going to need a batting piece. Whatever your batting of choice is for wall hangings will work fine in this project. You want to make sure you use a piece of batting that is at least a couple inches larger on all four sides than the quilt panel, right? And then we'll need fabric for our backing, which this is just like a regular quilt. You want to make sure again that the backing is at least a couple inches larger on all four sides than your quilt panel. Then you'll also need fabric for your binding. Now some other supplies that we'll need to create this project are the light kit, of course, which also calls for 3 AA batteries. Then we have some of our basic quilting supplies, so things like a rotary cutter with the corresponding cutting mat, some rulers, a pair of scissors, pins, a matching thread as well, a sewing machine that has some free motion quilting capabilities. We'll also be using a seam ripper and an awl. If you have one, they would come in very handy in this project, or some other sharp pointed tool as well. And don't forget to have an iron and an ironing board handy. And that's it. Let's get started.
Once you have your quilt panel cut to size, layer it over your batting piece, and then make sure that you're cutting that batting out so that it's at least 2 to 4 inches larger on all four sides than the quilt panel. Next is the backing fabric. I lay it on my table with the pretty side facing down, and then layer on top the batting and the quilt panel, so this makes your quilt sandwich. Smooth everything out and baste it together, then go ahead and quilt it using whatever your preferred method is. I'm using my long arm machine here, but you can also quilt it on your sewing machine or even by hand. Once it's quilted, go ahead and square up everything and trim off the excess, making sure to use a square ruler so that you get nice 90-degree angle edges. This is going to help your wall hanging lay nice and flat on the wall. So now we put that aside and we're ready to move on to the next thing, which is to cut out our binding strips. For this quilt, we are going to cut out 4 strips that measure 2.5 inches wide by the width of our fabric. So cut out those 4 strips, then go back and trim off the selvages because we don't want those in the binding. And then to combine your binding strips, we're going to lay one vertically with the pretty side facing up, and the other one goes on top of it but backwards so that the pretty side is facing down. And I'm matching and marking these 2 corner points here to make that line, and that's going to be my stitch line. So I continue doing this to all my strips, and then I take it to the sewing machine so I can sew them all together. Feel free to use pins like I'm doing here to hold your fabric steady. Remember that it's like a backwards L, and you are stitching from that top right corner to the bottom left corner. So just using a basic straight stitch, take it to your sewing machine and stitch those strips together. And I like to trim my seam allowance right as the sewing machine while I'm sewing the strips together. I remove my pins and then trim the seam allowance down to about 1/4 inch, and you can see that when I open this up, I have a perfectly combined binding strip. So continue to do that till you have one continuous strip that's made up of the 4 shorter strips, and then we take it to our ironing board to iron the entire thing in half lengthwise. When you get to the point where we put those strips together, open that seam allowance just to reduce a little bulk and give it a good press, and then continue pressing and folding the entire strip in half lengthwise. Now we're going to partially attach our binding, so I've put it here about 2/3 of the way. I leave about a 9 to 10 inch chunk that I'm not going to sew yet, and I place a pin. I am going to pin this top edge here just to keep it straight in place, but I'm going to start all the way down here where that second pin was, okay? And that's just going to help us finish off the binding when we get to that point, which we're not going to do yet. So I back stitch at the beginning to secure it, and then start stitching straight down. I'm using about 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I'm going to stop 1/4 inch up from that bottom edge, right around here. And when I get there, I want to pivot and stitch off the corner at a 45-degree angle. So I'll show you here how it works. Come down, stop about 1/4 inch up from the edge. I stop with the needle position down in my fabric, and then I pivot it so that the point is going at about a 45-degree angle, and then stitch off that edge. Maybe you can see it better here in the close-up so you can get a better idea of where the stitches are. So you can see I stopped there about 1/4 of an inch up, then I pivoted my fabric and just stitched right off the edge. There's no need to back stitch or anything, just do it like that. Now to do the other side, I'm going to tuck my finger under here, and when you lift it, you can see we have a 45-degree fold right here going across that corner. Then I fold the strip back down onto itself so that I have a fold that's flush with the quilt top, and then just pull it onto the side and have it be flush with the edge of your quilt. You're going to start stitching 1/4 of an inch in from the edge, back stitch to secure, and just stitch all the way down until you get to the next corner and repeat the process. So let me show you again on another corner. I'm stitching all the way down and stop about 1/4 of an inch up from that bottom edge, stop with the needle in, lift up my presser foot, I pivot it at 45-degree angle and just stitch right off the edge. To bring it down to the opposite side, fold it up so you have that fold that's flush with the top of your quilt top, and then remember to start again 1/4 of an inch in from the edge, back stitch to secure, and continue stitching. Now because we're coming around to the end, we don't want to stitch all the way across to the end. Stitch just a few inches, and we want to leave a nice big wide open gap on that middle bottom part of our quilt. So now we're going to make a pocket. I've cut out 2 squares of the backing fabric here that measure 4 inches square, layer one on top of the other with pretty sides touching, and we want to leave an opening on one of the 4 sides. So I'll start stitching on one side, go all the way around, and back stitch at the beginning and ends to secure, so that I leave about a 2-inch opening right in the middle of one of the 4 sides. Here I have one that's already been stitched. That's the opening right there. Go ahead and reduce some bulk in the corners by trimming all 4 corners off, and then reach in the opening and flip the entire thing inside out. Give it a nice press, and we're ready to attach our pocket. So I'm folding my wall hanging here in half vertically, making sure that I'm orienting it so that the bottom back of the quilt is in front of me, crease it with my finger, and I'm going to repeat the process to the pocket as well. I folded it in half vertically and made a crease. So now I can open this up, and I'm going to lay one crease, which is the one from the pocket, on top of the crease of our quilt top, and this is going to ensure that they are both centered perfectly one over the other. So pin the pocket in place. Here's the opening. Make sure that you orient that opening towards the bottom because it'll be covered up when we finish attaching the binding. And then you want to go ahead, take some thread and a hand sewing needle and whip stitch the left and right sides of the pocket only. You want to leave that opening at the top to fit our battery pack for our light kit. Now let me show you my favorite way to finish off the binding ends. So I have one here that's a little bit shorter than the other. Lay that one completely flat. The longer one is going to overlap it. Now the amount of fabric that we need it to overlap needs to be the same measurement of whatever the width of our strips were. In this case, if you recall, we cut out strips that were 2.5 inches wide by the width of the fabric. So measure 2.5 inches of overlap. So from where the strip that's underneath is to where the top one is going to overlap is what measures 2.5 inches. Go ahead and trim it down to that. And now we are going to turn our quilt, and I like to do it this way so I orient it the same way that we attached our strips when we were making the continuous strip for the binding. So one goes in front of me, pretty side up. The other one goes next to it, pretty side down in a backwards L. And we're matching up again the top right corner to the bottom left corner. Make your mark if you need to, and that is your stitch line. Remove your pins, trim that seam allowance down to about 1/4 of an inch, and when we open it up, you can see that it all lays perfectly flat. There's no puckers, and it's exactly the right size of fabric that we needed to complete the binding. Open up that seam allowance. You can press it open if you'd like, and then just finish stitching the last little chunk into place. Then to finish off your binding, it's just like any other quilt. Press the strip of binding to the back side, and you can sew it down by hand or by machine. For the corners, just push both sides of the binding back and then layer one over the other, trying to get a nice 45-degree mitered corner for your binding. Go ahead and use some pins or binding clips if you need it to stay in place as you stitch it either by hand or by machine.
Now, if you're thinking you need some printed instructions to complete this project, no worries. I've already gone ahead and created a PDF that you can download for free, and the link to it is in the description box below.
Now here's another sample of a wall hanging I made. You can see how the bottom side of the pocket was completely encased with the binding. Now all we need to do is to make our holes in the quilt so that we can slip in the light bulbs and make the whole thing light up. So I like to look at it and orient it so that the pocket side is facing me and it's towards the bottom. So I'm going to work my way all the way up to the top of this wiring where it starts off with one bulb at the top. And what I like to do is work it from the front of the wall hanging and kind of walk the light bulbs through and audition them, see where exactly I'd like to make holes so that I could have a light bulb in that spot. So I'm going to start off here at the top, and I think I'll do the center of both of the tires of this vehicle have light bulbs in them. I think that'll be a cute way to start. So here we go. And again, this is an easy way to audition it without having to measure. I can just tug on the wiring and see if it ends up in a spot where I can find a place to put a bulb. Otherwise, is try working in a different direction. I think this is the easiest way to do it. And then I'm just taking my water-soluble marker and marking every spot so that when I go to create my holes, I know exactly where I need to make them. Now, keeping in mind that this wire has 20 light bulbs on it, I want to work my way down and around so that by the time I get to the 20th light bulb, I'm somewhere near the bottom edge of my quilt and the battery pack can reach its pocket easily. Now you can set up your sewing machine to whatever the free motion capabilities are. In my case, I dropped the feed dogs and installed the darning foot. And then you just want a free motion quilt, basically with a straight stitch. Just move your quilt around in circles to make a small, about 1/4 of an inch circle around the spot that you marked. So here's a good sample to show you. You can poke through with your seam ripper first, or I like to start it off with the awl sometimes, and then make a short slit really small with my seam ripper. Make sure that you're not cutting into those stitches, okay? And then from the back side of the quilt, so I'll turn it over, I'll slip in one of the light bulbs. And you do want to have the hole be a little bit smaller than the light bulb so that you kind of have to push it in there a little bit. That will help keep it in place, and so it won't be as easy to slip out from the back side. So you can see I tug on it a few times. It's holding nice and neatly in place. And then you're going to repeat that to all of your holes, making sure to count all 20 because mine had 20 light bulbs. I want to make sure I'm taking advantage of each one of those spots. So carefully open them up a little bit with an awl and your seam ripper, and then start from the back side because I think you can see the thread a little bit easier in each hole. And then I just feed each one of the light bulbs in, and if you auditioned it on the front side, you should not have a problem with any of those light bulbs reaching or stressing to reach the next spot. You can see I'm here at the bottom. I put my batteries in and hit the on switch, slip the battery pack into the pocket, and our quilt is complete. Then use your favorite quilt hanging method to display and enjoy your new wall hanging.
And that's it for this video tutorial. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, hit it with the thumbs up below, share it across the different social media sites. A big thanks to Northcott Fabrics for providing me with all the materials I needed for this tutorial, and thanks again for watching. I'll see you all next time. Bye!